say, well, I went into communications because I'm not good at math. It's not math. It's not math.
You know, the second you say that, you're just putting yourself in a corner. And why do we do that?
Hey everyone, welcome to a joint Inside PR recording and the Spin Sucks Fireside Chat. I am Gini Dietrich and I'm here with my Inside PR co-hosts Joe Thornley and Martin Waxman. We've decided to do a joint show today because we are lucky enough to have Tyler Brown with us, and we thought, why not kill two birds with one stone? Tyler is Senior Vice President at Mercury, a digital marketing firm in Washington, D.C. Until earlier this year, Tyler had various positions at the Republican National Committee. I will admit that Tyler's previous job made me a little reticent to talk with him at first, but he quickly became one of my favorite people because we think exactly alike. He believes the digital department should go away in favor of integrated communications. He was on the team that built the digital department at the RNC from the ground up, so he has some really great tips and how-tos. Martin and Joe, I've had the pleasure to spend some time with Tyler, and I'm really excited that you get to as well. So, Tyler, hello.
Hello, it's good to be here.
We're glad you're here. And like I said, you know, I got to spend, a little bit of an hour with you a couple of weeks ago, and we do think a lot of the same things, especially when it comes to digital, so I'm very excited that you're here.
Absolutely.
Now, I have one thing that we need to get out of the way. You worked with Sean Spicer for many years. Please tell us he's a really good guy who got stuck in a really crappy position.
I will say, there is a part of it that's very surreal when you see someone that you've known and you've worked with for a long time on Saturday Night Live. You know, that's
right.
That's something in of itself. But no, absolutely, Sean is a great guy. He is a he's a wonderful person who really, I think I've seen help many people in their career in politics and learning. He's a very strong strategist, and he has a great sense of humor. But I think what a lot of people are seeing is that it's typically said that position, the press secretary position for the White House, is one of the hardest jobs.
Sure.
In DC, probably one of the hardest jobs in PR, and that's in a traditional time. I think we're really experiencing something where we're rethinking media, where we're rethinking exchanges and how people speak with their elected representatives. So this is a different period, and so I think it's certainly a very hard job.
Well, I'm in the middle of watching West Wing because I didn't see it when it first came out, and it's funny to watch, especially as a communicator, watch C.J. Craig's role and how one of the journalists said to her, "I'm only here until I find a real reporting job," and she was like, What do you mean? Do you really mean that? And he's like, yeah, I'm not a stenographer. So I think it's a really interesting look at the press briefing overall, and should it even exist anymore?
Well, I have to lead with an admission. I have actually never seen an episode of The West Wing.
Well, I just started, so you're not far behind.
I may be the only person in here. But, look, there's a lot of debates. In my opinion, there are a lot of debates going on, about how to be more transparent, how to be more public, how to have that interaction with the press. But I think a lot of people will tell you, and this is going back, this isn't just during the Trump administration, but that the press briefing has been something of there's been a debate around the press briefing for a long time. And ever since television came into the briefing and the theatrics of it, overshadowing some of the back and forth between reporters in the White House. Mm-hmm. And that's a legitimate question under any president.
Sure.
I think it's been complicated even further when you look at how social media has interacted with it. And just the TikTok, it makes it much more difficult to put things in context. A lot of things are shot for the, what comes up on the evening news or even the live break-in on television. So I think that there are very good questions about, how to move forward on the press briefing, how to make it the most productive. Certainly the goal should be transparency. Certainly the goal should be accountability. How you do that, I think those are very good questions. And I think that, ones that both the White House, going back, not just the Trump administration, but the Obama administration and the Bush administration before it, And people who are there in the press briefing, they'll tell you, how can they find the most productive format.
One of the things that you've done is you were part of the team that built the digital department, for lack of a better term, for the RNC. So, talk about that. How do you go from conception to building something that's gigantic?
Right. Well, yeah, I was there at the RNC in 2012. We lost to the Obama re-election campaign that did an outstanding job with their digital work. But I think really one of my key takeaways from that was not so much that there was a technology or capability gap between what the Democrats were doing and what the Republicans were doing. There were a number of things that the Romney digital director, Zach Moffett, put together and rolled out that were on par with what the Obama campaign was doing. But it didn't have the same, they weren't able to put it out as fast in certain times or get as much scale. And I think it just goes to show that long runway is extremely helpful. So coming out of that, as Republicans, we were looking at ourselves and saying, how can we be doing this better? What are the questions to solve? We know where we want to get, but what's the path to get there? And I think my takeaway was the answers or the solutions we were chasing were really less technological as so much as being organizational. How do you put digital front and center in your organization? How do you put it at the center? What does it say about you? How do you interact with people? What is that relationship between users and the RNC? And those were the types of questions that we really needed to solve in putting together a digital department. In addition to adding talent and all those other questions that come along, which are a few.
Yeah,
I find it really interesting as an outside observer. You have been in politics for several years. You've just come through an election. And when you were working on the election, everything in the world focused on what was happening with the US election. And social media would lead every day. The news would constantly be evolving. And now you've popped out to do corporate communications, to do public affairs on the digital side outside. Did you find that suddenly your face was slamming into a wall as you just had to slow down to a different pace?
It's funny that coming from the RNC and Republican side of digital politics in the first place, you kind of always had this assumption that everybody was ahead of you. We were constantly playing catch up, that we had to move very quickly, that we had to find the quickest path to achieve success on things that we wanted to accomplish. And then you get into the outside world and you think, oh wow, maybe we were further ahead than some of the other folks. So I think the real interesting question, and this was something that we dealt with internally, was what does a digital organization look like? And I think I see that as something that a lot of companies are struggling to answer. I've had them, air quotes, say solve the digital thing. And I think that a lot of it stems from questions at the beginning and how they organize, where they look at digital and they say, it doesn't matter what businesses you're in. If you're in the selling widgets, there's the traditional sales division, the marketing division, the production division. All these things have existed, and the way they seem to answer the question is they say, let's add another vertical. This is digital. And you guys go do your thing, and the rest of the organization will continue to do the pieces that we've always done. And I think that's the starting question where, that's the critical question that has to be answered before anything else can lead to success. How do you really build in digital at a nuclear level, inherent in everything that you do, not just because digital is the new piece, but because it's the way that you're interacting with everybody in terms of your organization, your customers, your advocates, people who may not like your product or be critical of your product, your employees. It's this one digital lens that all your means of your organization are working through. So you really just can't exist as a whole bunch of separate verticals anymore without answering that question. And I think that's the critical question to answer.
So how did you guys do that at the RNC when you have, millions of constituents? And you did have a digital department. So how did you create the nucleus so that you were across all verticals?
It was a lot of convincing. I mean, I think
Sure.
that's why in my mind, it kind of goes back to, again, it's not the technological questions that are hard. It's really the internal organizational ones, and it's relationship building. And I think that's something that everybody who's working in digital market, is important on themselves and incumbent upon themselves. I always think back to the old Saturday Night Live IT guy that would just say, "Move, get out of the way. I know all the answers." And I think it's really less about proving how much you know and more about how can you bring the rest of the team with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that they can feel bought in on the process, they can be educated on the process, and what the things that they're trying to accomplish with their own goals, how can you be helpful in creating success for them.
So you mentioned relationship building, which I think, again, we've all talked about it and is so important. And the second part of, PR's name, relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And yet for so many years, we became broadcasters in a way when we didn't really know how to use email properly. We just kind of used it almost as a spam tool. So how would you...
I would argue we still don't know how to use email properly. But.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that too. How would you build relationships between the traditional side and the digital side? Like, what are a couple of the strategies you would use to bring the traditional side along? Because there's a lot of resistance, partially because of fear of change.
Sure.
Right. And I think particularly in politics, there's something that people have been doing for a long time. And then, the digital team comes in and they're kind of doing it too. I used to make the analogy that people discuss the evolution of the digital department in politics in general. I used to describe it as it's like the small balloon in the corner of a room. And then slowly and slowly, year by year, it's kind of filling up the room and involved in more activities. In politics, there's really three things that a political organization does. It's voter contact, messaging or communications, and fundraising. And the digital department was really involved with all three of those. And each year, a growing share of all three of those responsibilities. So that's not to say that I certainly don't think that you need to have exclusively a digital department. I don't think that's the answer and where we're going. But I think more important is making these tactics and these strategies more accessible for the people who are traditionally doing voter contact, who are traditionally doing messaging, or whatever their responsibility may be, opening up the door and really being teachers and givers rather than shutting the door and saying, hey, we're the only people that understand this. I think it's building that internal communication to say that rather than, I'll see a lot of folks who may not work in digital and they say, oh, this is extremely difficult, or I don't understand it, I'm not a digital person, I don't get it. And I think rather than allowing that notion to continue, I think it's really incumbent upon folks on the digital side and digital communicators to say, actually, it's radically simple. I'm not going to, it's not to say that there aren't very complex things going on in the background, but a lot of the tactics are very accessible. And so being able to teach a little bit about digital advertising, about content marketing, about good social strategy and engagement, and really talking about it not just in terms of metrics, but really about organizational goals and tying it back to the things that they accomplish. And I feel like that's when you see the light bulb come on the other side of the table, where they say, I see where you're going. And that really aligns with what I'm trying to do. And so when you can create that relationship that you're actually imparting value, I think that's when you start to get the snowball rolling and you see more feedback. I mean, how can we solve, people asking you, how can we solve these problems? And so, at the RNC in particular, that there were a couple things that we would do. Slack was a huge one.
Yep.
We started using Slack internally. And we were, it wasn't an official thing where people had to start using Slack, but the more we would sell folks in other departments and say, we really think it's a valuable tool. We want to talk to you more. We want to help you solve your problems, and we want to have that two-way communication. Certainly not everybody bought into it, but I think the people that did really found it productive in terms of understanding what's going on in other parts of the organization so that they can think more holistically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you guys use Slack at Mercury?
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See,
I think it's I think it's extremely valuable, not just as a communications tool, but I think just as building interrelationship
Yep.
skills. I feel like part of the value of Slack is not just that it's productive or that everybody's part of a communication and you can duck in or duck out, but even just the fact that it's fun. You look at any type of the history of online messaging tools, and frankly, if it's not a good user experience, people aren't going to use it. So you can't sell new people coming onto it to say that hey, this is really productive, this dry, productive tool, unless they enjoy spending time there. They're just not going to be there. So I think the fun is important, not just because it's enjoyable and you want to enjoy being at work, but it's important because it leads to greater organizational success.
Joe, what's your experience with Slack and Skype for Business?
Well,
that's not a leading question
back
at all.
on Slack.
Yeah.
Slack is got a great interface. Tyler, you have, as I was saying earlier, what fascinates me is that you've come out of the very center of the maelstrom. You've come out of the deep and fast water, and now you're in that world of corporate communications that's much more deliberate. In politics, you know that you'll get the attention, and it's about channeling it. In the corporate world, it's about trying to attract attention and build attention. And it seems to me that something happened in social media, in the digital, during this last election cycle. And that is that probably the biggest agenda setter figured out that the way to deal with difficult issues wasn't to respond, but it was to change the subject in a very dramatic way and deny oxygen to the critics or people on the other side of the issue. And in a polarized environment, that leads to a lot of noise in support of that new position, and people on the other side not necessarily connecting at all. Do you find that now that you're out dealing on the corporate side, that has some of your clients saying this is a no-win situation, and in fact they want to go back to the old way of doing things, which was knocking on doors, walking through the doors, and doing things in a face-to-face, behind closed doors way?
I certainly 2016 left a lot of folks who would say, here's the playbook, this is the way you should run the play, a very standard approach to public affairs, and I think it threw a lot of it on its face. I do think there's part of that maybe has less to do with public affairs, but perhaps a perception of Washington D.C. and government where overall public opinion has dropped to a certain level, where it became less a matter of what is this issue or that issue, but how are you going to align with what's going on with the rest of America, and that gap may have had a lot to do with the changing notion of what is the right standard play in a public affairs setting. To your point, going back to a traditional setting, I think that certainly sometimes there is that instinct. It feels like a safer play, and it feels like something that's more comfortable. But I think that the ultimate issue with it is that it ultimately is going to lead to failure in terms of what your customers or your audience, whatever it may be, is expecting. I think that we're in a period where the amount of engagement that a user can have with multiple brands, multiple interests, multiple issues that may attract their attention, I really don't think you can afford to stand back and not be involved. It doesn't mean that you need to try to jump in it with a lot of overly energetic about it, or creating a lot of attention, hopping around to do that. But I think it's really just, what is the value of your message? How does it resonate with the people that you're trying to talk to? It doesn't have to, I'll say this all the time where people are trying to answer the question of launching a Twitter handle, and they're asking themselves questions about how often should I tweet, or what's the optimal time to tweet? Is it in the morning or is it in the night? And my attitude is really, those are all secondary questions. The first question is, what is the value you're providing to your audience? And if that means that you are engaging on Twitter once a month, but you're providing, you're the source of information
Right.
that they're expecting,
Right. Yes.
then that's an extremely effective and time effective way to approach, that particular channel. So I don't think, I think a lot of times when one of the discouraging factors when customers or organizations or companies are looking at some of these tools is they feel like it's too much work. And I think that's really, gets back to making things radically simple in their minds. What are you trying to accomplish as an organization? And what is the most effective way to do that? What is the most effective way to build that relationship? And that may not, that may not involve a huge time commitment. It may just, involve a little forethought.
It's a really interesting point, because when you think of those two questions, the question of value was one that we used to always add. And then I started out in the days when you had to type news releases. When you had to type a news release, every time
Tyler's not that old.
Yeah, no, but changes meant
140 characters.
Yeah, so changes meant you had to retype it.
Right.
And so that was more time involved. And so really there was a value question to it, because you knew that you had this piece of news. What was the most important piece of news that you could spend that time getting ready to go out? And all of a sudden we can now just broadcast everything. And I wonder if it isn't a question of, looking at what we do and saying, okay, this amount is pollution, just junk that we're putting out there. And then what is our value, and where is our audience, and where do they want to connect with us? I guess that wasn't a question.
No, but I was going to say you raised a really great point there, because I think, one part of public affairs has traditionally been, what are the messages we're launching? What are the ships that we're putting out to sea? And because prior to digital tools, you may not have been able to answer this question very well, we weren't asking ourselves, where are these ships landing? Are they landing with the right people? Are they landing at the right audiences? Are they delivering the messages that matter? And that's why I think, the use of data is, people have been using it from a marketing standpoint for a long time for consumer products and sales. But I don't think we've been using data very well on the public affairs side to say, let me identify the audiences that matter here, so that you can start to distill some of the noise pollution and actually deliver things that are important for folks, so you can narrow down that message. And so I think that's one of the things that, as public affairs professionals, we need to be asking ourselves more, not just what messages are we sending up, but what messages are actually landing and where are they landing.
So sorry, Joe, go ahead.
I was just going to say, picking up on that, how about social media and digital media coming back the other way? From 2008 to 2016, we had the United States leading the world down the path of open government, and that led to the formation of the Open Government Partnership with countries around the world, some not so democratic, looking at ways to introduce more openness to advance democracy and public input. And during that period of time, during those 8 years, because of open government, we could see the public providing input, and it was being captured, and it provided an indisputable fact when reported back. Early on with the new administration, the open government portal was downgraded. Things that had asked questions earlier were downgraded. I don't know that anyone has really taken the mantle there. And of course, then we see people choosing public opinion polls that suit their purposes and interpreting them. So what do you see in this environment as someone who's outside? I ask myself, is there going to be a new point of normalcy? Will the inbound communication from that was part of open government come back, or has it died during the course of this administration?
Well, I think the inbound part. I think the inbound part is unstoppable. I really think that's one of those pieces that once you start to move that stone and it starts rolling, I really don't think that there's any stopping it. The policies of this administration aside, one of the times when it really hit me, I was sitting at home and there was a filibuster debate that I think Rand Paul had launched, and I was watching it from home, and I believe it was Senator Ted Cruz came up there, and he started reading tweets from people who were watching it at home. And one, that's I guess that's a good way to fill time. But two, it was really interesting to me on a fundamental level that people were watching the debate, regardless of what the debate was. They were watching a debate on the floor of the United States Senate, and their voice was being heard. And that really struck me as a very interesting example of democracy in action. The ability, and it's really not just the ability, it's the expectation that I can speak up, that I could be speaking up to, a company in terms of customer service, that I could be speaking up to my elected representative, and expect feedback in some way, shape, or form. And so I think that expectation in the minds of the public out there, I think the United States, but I think, more and more broadly, the world in general, that expectation is being ingrained with social media and the use of digital tools in general. So I see that as something that is going to continue to move forward. I think that each administration is going to have their own rules and how they want to choose to approach it. But we see right now the president of the United States retweet things that he sees on Twitter. That's really unthinkable in terms of response,
right?
From an elected leader than we could have imagined a couple of years ago. Now, what it's all going to look like, I'm sure it's going to be messy as we start to figure out all of this, and we get reset our expectations about what is that relationship between ourselves, between brands, between elected officials, between organizations, and each other. I think we're still trying to figure some of that out. But I think that overall expectation is something that will continue to move forward and not backwards.
Sometimes it's possible for us to see social media out of Washington almost completely framed and dominated by the president. But you're close to it, and in this new environment, this Congress that was elected, there must be some other people that you look at who are in the Senate, the Congress, or elsewhere, who have adapted to the new environment and are being particularly adept. Are there some people that you would recommend that we watch to see the new pace setters in this area?
The first person I actually thought of was someone. Can you ask that one more time? Sorry, that one I had to blank.
Sure. Are there people who, in the new environment, not the president, but people outside, other people elected to Congress or the Senate, people who are maybe policy institutes, are there others who have adjusted to the new environment, the new rules, and are making particularly adept use of social media and digital media?
No, absolutely. One of the first people I was going to think of was Elise Stefanik, who was at the time she was elected, the youngest female elected to Congress. I think she was about 30 years old at the time. And when you thought, the way she communicates, it's less of this is my official channel and here's messages I want to relay. But let's start off with a very important point that I'm a human being, and that I'm experiencing the world just like everybody else is. I have a summer reading list just like everybody else. I engage in whether it's some of her official functions, parades, and so forth. But her Instagram channel is fantastic and worth the follow, because I think it really like anything else, any success on social media is going to be built off of being a human being first. Nobody's going to be signing up to just receive advertisements. They sign up for the content. And if there's a message that you can deliver within that, the more power to you. But, it really comes, again, with, if you are a politician, I see a lot of times politicians that will come up there, they launch a social media account, and it's just, it's just this delivery of what's really, in effect, press releases. And I think that's, that mindset that comes from, okay, I have a piece of news that I want to deliver. The way I've been delivering this news for years, decades, is through the press release. And I think it really requires people to reset their expectations of who they're dealing with and who they're interacting with. I always make the point, a press release is a specific specific tool intended for the media, so they can identify what are the bits that they can pull into their news story. It is not. Saw this all the time when people were first building websites in politics, and the CMS would be filled with press releases. And I always applied, what I call like the mom test. Like, if my mom were to read this, how long would she stay? How long? What would the bounce rate be?
Right.
Yeah, well, probably very
98%.
But the thing is, what?
Yeah, it's a good test for all of us, I think. And what is our ability as storytellers? And I think these new channels really give the ability to rethink, rather than just the way we spoke to the media, which is a particular lens of, here are the bits and pieces that we'd like to go into a story, but we're actually the storytellers in this case. And what is the story we want to tell, and what is the story that people are interested in receiving and meaningful to them?
Yeah, and really, news releases, a lot of us forget this. It's a format.
Correct.
Right? It's a format. It's not the only format. The news story is more important. I have a question, actually, and everyone watches the president's tweets and but I want to step back from the content of that, because one thing that I think all of us, no matter what side you're on, would agree on is he really is a digital first president. And so we're so caught up analyzing the tweets and what every single message means. I'd like to step back and get your perspective on the way that the current president, President Trump, approaches digital media. How is that going to change the way future politicians approach it?
I think what you're seeing with President Trump is something that you've begun to see in other places in politics, but certainly never with this type of visibility. I think that, to the point that's made, the point I was making earlier about conveying your own personal self first, your own personality first. Certainly, President Trump wasn't the first person to have the first president to have a Twitter handle. But certainly a lot of people followed Barack Obama, but there wasn't the same level of, this is who I am as a person. It certainly felt as if, this is what my campaign, and this is what my White House is tweeting out. This is the message of the day. He had a lot of followers, if you wanted to, judge it by that. But it wasn't the same level of, let me give you access to something you haven't seen before. I think one of the things you're going to start to see is how more politicians are using Snapchat. Certainly Snapchat is, has been, I don't know if it is anything new now, but certainly, for the past couple of years, it was the new fad. But there was something interesting going on there, was people were figuring out how to provide a story in a different way. It wasn't, the goal of it wasn't to show you what's going on in front of the curtains. It was to tell you the story of what's going on behind the curtains. And that is a different story, and it's a more personal story, and it's a story more about accessibility. So I think, the root there is more politicians, successful politicians, are going to be looking for ways to make themselves more accessible. And I think, that users, voters, consumers, people aren't dumb. They can tell the difference between something that's staged to look accessible or authentic and something that actually is authentic. And so I think with your point about President Trump, You can be all over the board, and certainly many Americans are in terms of their personal feelings. But I don't think anybody doubts that they are getting something in a authentic voice from the president, and that's a really just interesting point.
That's true. It is time for our speed round. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I need you to answer with the very first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Are you sure?
100%.
Okay.
Let's do it.
What is your favorite blog?
I'll be honest, I don't even know if I really have a favorite blog, because I feel like I get everything through my Twitter feed, which is that becomes the interface.
That's fair.
But there's not a lot of places that I'll go to directly to see what the latest update is.
All right. Favorite podcast?
Favorite Inside PR.
Well, besides Inside PR.
Favorite podcast, I would have to say is, I'm really struggling with this.
You can go with Inside PR. We're cool with that. Is that
Hopefully
your
we'll
final answer?
That is my final answer.
All right. What book changed your life?
Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal. I think that really, I thought that was very interesting, and look at how organizations are run and what it's going to look like to run organizations moving forward.
Uh-huh. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
What was your last vacation?
We actually went to the beach last week for the 4th of July. It was fantastic. We had 3 boys, enjoyed it. I think Mom and I need a vacation after that.
Correct.
But we had, yeah.
What's your favorite snack?
Oh, I would have to say Oreos.
Oreos, that's a good one. What's the best meal you've ever had?
Best meal I've ever had. In any barbecue place in America, I will have a good time.
All right. What's your guilty pleasure?
It's got to be barbecue.
When you write, do you prefer the laptop or pen and paper?
It's definitely the laptop.
The laptop.
I need a nice, comfortable spot and pick my feet up and work off the laptop.
And my last question, your latest binge?
Latest binge, my wife and I are in season 3 of Bloodline. We caught the first 2.
I just finished it.
So we are just on the 3rd season right now, and we're having to pace ourselves. It's good. It's stressful. It's stressful watching it.
It is a little stressful. You're right. Well, thank you, sir, so much for being here. It's good to see you again.
Absolutely enjoyed it.